Yeah, this is another solo Patriotarchy podcast. This is a little bit more of an elucidation on the religion being the opiate of the masses. And we're going to get into a little bit more of the historical context, the nature of basically Marx's criticism of this. And as I pointed out, and I will interject that audio and play it before I start the formal podcast with this, and that's going to help figure some things out and navigate some more of the waters as far as where it's going to go and what it's going to be about as a more coherent topic. Religion is the opiate of the masses. Uh, Karl Marx said that, and of course a Marxist would say that, right? But would you expect a typical dissident right response from me? Or some kind of alt right response from me to say and point the finger at, well, the Chosenites or any kind of thing like that? It's a possibility. But let's go a little bit let's go a little bit deeper. Let's go a little bit more philosophical and esoteric with this notion. Instead of just quantifying it or having some kind of, in essence or essential argument to be something quantifiable to the effect of like, well, religion is just useful, having a very Western Christianity kind of take on it. Well, it's just here to quell or tame people's passions or to be a useful tool to, keep certain aspects of people down, to keep certain races of people down, to, control the population, or it's a giant money laundering scheme, things of this nature. Like, just damnable kind of things to say about on how it's used as a tool of control, tool of the government, things of that nature. Because I mean, a church is essentially a governing body. A church of Buddhism, a church of Hinduism, a church of this, church of Native Americans, all that stuff. If people want to have, and church is the only like really real way and it's not, they're obviously not true churches, you know, but that's the only like quantifiable way in the Western context to say, well, that's an organized body of a religion, right? That's how, that's how we can say, instead of just going and explaining, the whole gamut, just say it's the church of something, right? It's a false church. It's not correct, but it's the only way you can do it. And how is that opiate used, right? How is that how's that opium prescribed, right? Well, to say, it's different in Orthodox asceticism, it completely is. It's not something that is used as a control mechanism. No, it's not how we see it at all. And obviously, if you're familiar with the religious persecutions from the Bolsheviks, and if you're familiar with the inclinations that Marx had and him, I mean, it's weird too because in the American context, they're, oh well, if you point out and who led these revolutions, you're being anti-Semitic. But the problem is that Karl Marx was vehemently anti-Semitic, and he was very, very focused on um, dealing with the problems that they brought about in other countries and their subversions and things like of that nature, right? But the issue with this is that out of all those churches and those dead religions and those synagogues, whatever, right? Those are all dead faiths. Those are all faiths that aren't true. So right there, you have an issue. When you're worshiping something dead, no wonder why it's going to feel like a obligation, a something that is, and with that overall opium or with that dead worship, it can feel like a drug. It can feel like an addiction that you have to come back to. It can feel like something that is you're obligated to do so, right? So it's going to crush your will. It's going to submit you to something that is dead. That is, well, as as the world embraces that death. right? So if you're of the world, it's embracing a deathly notion. It's embracing something that is essentially not alive. And, if it's not alive in Christ, then they don't have that understanding, right? Camera's wobbly. But it's just it's absolutely destructive. It's not going to get anybody anywhere. You're not going to progress. There's always going to be that stagnation. So it's no wonder why people come up with quips, people come up with things of saying, well, we could follow that Marxist route, right? We could follow that and just put it in different contexts, right? Just put it in different ways that this is the way it is. This is the way these things are, and become comfortable with it somehow, some way, be able to deal with this and say, oh well, it's fine. You know, well they believe in a dead guy that resurrected, right? That's he's essentially a zombie, as I've heard atheists put it, right? It's not correct. Like, none of this is a correct attitude to have, because if you think that religion is just quantifiable to everything that is classified as a church of something or a religion of something, it's not the way to go about it. No wonder why people think that's an opiate for the masses. No wonder why people think the way they do and have the general attitudes that they do towards it, because the contextualization of it all, it's like, oh, well, why do I just need to do this? This is just going through the motions. This is nothing, right? This means nothing to me. And that's just it, where it's like, okay, if you're not getting anything out of it, it's if you've lost faith and if it's dead to you, then yeah, I mean, there is that general attitude towards it. And, frankly, being a human being, you can't really blame people for that kind of attitude if they have such an attitude towards it. But unironically, I mean, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. You should. It should go deeper for somebody. It should, seeking something deeper. And this is why the Bolshevik persecution was so strong in Russia against, the Orthodox Church, right? And this is why you had somebody like Marx, so embodied by Lenin and Stalin and the progenitors of all of that evil, that gets pushed aside in art, unfortunately, in the history books, right? So the problem is that that led to a greater evil, that led to a much deeper evil, and it became on it started on a very human level. And I mean, people can complain about the Holocaust, and say all these things they want, right? But the Holodomor was there as well. If you're not cautious to the Holodomor and what happened on the other side of the coin, then you're not seeing the overall the overall arching evil on both sides. See, and that's just it, where it's like you can come up with these tropes, you can come up with these quips and things like that, and quantify it. Say whatever you want, say whatever buzzword there is. But the problem is that the truth is there, and when it's there and right in front of right in front of your face, well, then I mean, like, why wouldn't you try to pick it up and examine it and reconnect with what you think might not be an opiate, right? Might not be something that's going to embrace death. And one of those very, very strong criticisms that Marx seemed to have against it, and as you saw it play out in communism, while, there's always the naming of whom carried out with communism and who persecuted Christians and who persecuted Jews and who persecuted those that were at the forefront of it. But the irony is here is they were funded by all kinds of world governments. They were funded by all kinds of financial backers. And it wasn't just any one set of people or named people as the dissident right or the alt-right likes to hammer it home to. So it's very problematic when it comes to this. It's especially problematic in the narrative of the National Socialists being Strasserists or whatever kind of economic theory they want to come up with to negate the fact that it was just state, uh, it was state communism versus racial communism. There wasn't really a significant difference in this, and within the economic policies, it was still very much so state first. Where would we be leaving off without Bolshevism? Because obviously Bolshevism and communism are one and the same, but it really, really reiterates the fact that it was an attack on both the Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox churches, but namely, be focusing on the Orthodox Church, especially the ties to Russia, especially the ties to, the Nazis and the Bolsheviks during the time of World War II. There was even World War One where it was ramped up too. And and I mean, we'll cover that, and I'll cover that in another podcast instead of just going down the same beaten path when it comes to this. But because of the Bolshevism, because of the inherent crypto Judaism, and the Western influences and control after World War One and after World War Two, there seems to be a lot of confusion as to how the Orthodox Church and Orthodox Christianity handled all of that. And to say the Jesuit influence wasn't there, well, there's another realm of influence because of obviously all of the Third Rome hysteria and the Third Fatima and the Catholic consecration of Moscow or Russia, has been there from the get go. And with that being said, it's not entirely Bolshevik. It was under Bolshevik control. It wasn't, just under the control of what we thought to be just the communists, right? Because there definitely is a very, very real influence from the Jesuits and from the fact that they were integrated with this as well. And of course, the Jesuits do have issues with them being, well, Judaized in the faith and not being an actual understanding of what Christianity should be, or very, very much integrated with the issues at hand that influenced, well, the persecutions towards the true church, towards Orthodox Christianity. But the West also didn't have an understanding of this. And you can have revisionists turn around and say, well, there's certain historical events that never happened because of the Judaized influence or the crypto Judaism of communism, and what the Third Reich was trying to prevent from spreading throughout the world. But in turn, National Socialism was built on that same dialectic as well. World War One was a little bit more messier of a political situation, and it wasn't as religiously fundamentally good versus evil. It was definitely monarchy starting to die off, and them being integrated into more of obviously a more liberalistic or democratic kind of society, right? And doing away with the class system is what communism wanted. But obviously, with the class system being more monarchical, that is more based on a hierarchy, right? A social hierarchy, or a monarchical caste system, rather than a system of any real economic interdependence. So the issue with that is obviously Marxism can fall, and socialism can fall into everybody is the same kind of trap, when naturally as human beings we realize there's a hierarchy. So there's obviously issues with these ideological words and these ideological mindsets. And there is definitely issues when it comes to taking it all under into consideration, given also the economic factors throughout those time periods in history and how impactful they were to justify well, the defense and offense of each and every country involved during those two tedious and very, very awful periods of European history. Now, I could make an atheist argument and say that there was no religious or religious fundamentalism involved, and they were atheistic governments attacking each other. More so, the feudalistic empires of World War One was more so of a territorial gain, and just like every great war, a need for resources, a battle for resources. But World War II was a little bit more clear cut on who the good and the bad were, even though the Bolsheviks and communists were aligned with the Nazis for a long time leading up to and past even the point of World War II, which makes it very convoluted and ideologically interesting because of the fact that the Nazis opposed and used their propaganda so far as to blame the Jews for everything. But the issue with this is that the Jesuits were also in just this much control. And to say, that Jesuitism is a form of, well, bastardized Christianity or a sense of Kabbalistic theology imprinted onto the Catholic Church, well, you wouldn't be wrong in those assumptions. But the issue is that it doesn't stem from liberalism, doesn't stem from Judaism. Liberalism doesn't stem from anything that's inherently Jewish. Neither does capitalism, neither does communism, neither does socialism. You could argue that National Socialism was Zionist. You could argue that the Bolsheviks were just flat out not only anti-Semitic, but they were anti-Zionist. In fact, they were anti-state inherently. They wanted you to worship the state and have no religion at all. But even with state worship comes consequences, because you see that with monarchies. Because if the royal families are a form and or a representation of the state, well, the manifestation of these leaders without religion, such as Catholicism, Orthodoxy, or some form of Protestantism during the days of World War One and World War Two, or interwar periods, or things like that, tend to do away with it. Now you see it in a more stable civilization like China, who has, in a sense of a culture, a civilization, and tied to the few Eastern religions that are across the land. Even though it is technically illegal to practice religion under communist regimes, there's still that stability and still that factor of that civilization and very deep, rich, traditional roots tied to it. You see that even in Japan on the flip side with their hyper active capitalism integrated with, various bits of socialism, of course. You see that their deep cultural roots, their deep traditional roots go towards the culture. You even see this in Native American culture. You see this even throughout African tribes. There's very deep cultural and civilizational roots attached to it. So it's very interesting to see that attached to the core of those traditions and to what it is. Now, with Bolshevism, obviously had this problem, obviously had these issues with communism, that the roots were to attack Orthodox Christianity. And if it wasn't for Orthodox Christianity, Russia would have had a hard time culturally and empirically competing with the likes of somebody like England or, somebody like Great Britain. And even due to the fact that there was definitely influences within the Bolshevik regime that people, lead to get on their high horse about as an ethical conundrum. Well, the issues there is that this ethical conundrum doesn't lead to any paths that is fruitful. They have various issues with that being parsed out and that not being in black and white. So, with that being said, this is going to continue to this, throughout this podcast, this is going to be a theme that these various iterations of whatever ism, is fashionable at the time, or whatever is, coming into light, that this is going to be a continued series, because obviously I dealt with humanism kind of in the past and modernism as it relates to humanism in the past. And you could argue that ideologically, when it gets away from a monarch or kind of a hierarchical structure and flatlines itself into something that's classless, but it does have moved for advancement and a much more economic scale, it does become something that is absolutely baseless, something that is just driven by a consumer product or driven by a classless society, that there's no room for achievement or economic advancement when humanity literally does thrive on a hierarchy. So there is that attached to it. And of course, I will link, the sources that I have in the articles that I pull from here as well, because that would just be, dishonest if I didn't do that. So getting into more so of the Jesuit control of what communism and socialism and Bolshevism are, as people like to point the finger at the, So, just getting back to this opiate of the masses is obviously a little bit more entrenched. And, as I pointed out in some of this, that there's obviously issues with German idealism. And Germany, for the most part, with its National Socialism, with its Marxism, with just its just overall dialectic and what it gave to the Western world, it was just an ideological nightmare. It was just awful, because you had Hegel, who was a Protestant, and then you had the Catholic Church and the issues with National Socialism. You had that with the communist persecutions. So you just operator. And I obviously went after Christian identitarianism earlier, and its ideological issues, along with uh, the issues with the positive Christianity movement, with Catholicism and Protestantism. You also had Kirchenkampf, which is the Nazis' version of Marx saying religion is the opiate for the masses, right? So they in turn had their own version of it. People on the alt-right like to LARP, or like to think that they were the antithesis to Bolshevism, or they were the antithesis to uh, creating a sort of anti-communist, anti-Jewish banker um, bulwark as sort of a rebellion against it all. But in reality, it wasn't. In reality, it just wasn't. So now you have the issues with that. Now you have the issues on those fronts, which we'll probably cover in the next few as comparing it to this. But this is obviously going to be more focused on orthodoxy instead of the positive Christianity movement and all that garbage, which just sounds like more evangelical Protestantism than it does anything that's tied to a political ideology. Well, funnily enough, it's kind of like the same. And liberals like to do that, and they like to attach, Nazi fascism to religious fanaticism here in the United States, but that's just not even comparable, not even in the same wheelhouse. But the weird part is that there is that opiate of the masses occurrence again. But as I said before, I'm going off topic again, so now I'll bring it back to the German idealism, which I was going off of, and made some points. So this comes from an article that the authors of Communism and Socialism are the Jesuits. It's titled "The True Authors of Communism." True authors of Communism and Socialism, the Jesuits. In the Hegelian dialectic, you have the agenda, the centralization of power, to the thesis, manufacture terrorist threat, the antithesis, repressive police state, the synthesis, removal of freedoms, transfer of power from the many to the few, which happened in National Socialism, happens in America, unfortunately, happens in plenty of other places, and especially happens under socialism and communism, which is the point, the oligarchical rule. This is without a doubt the clearest explanation has ever come across about the historical origin of communism and socialism and who formulated its ideology. To understand the Hegelian character character of Jew. Okay, so the to understand the Hegelian characteristic of Jewsetical deception, Hegelian dialectic, a very old Jesuit principle explained in the picture below, we must consider that the doctrines of communism were designed by the Jesuits through what we know as their reductions in Paraguay in the 17th and 18th centuries, which were a series of communes in which a Jesuit priest exercised authority over the natives there. That environment, the Jesuit order maintained control over a group of South American Guarani Indians, I think that's how you say it, who they educated and trained to work on the behalf, generating goods that were later sold in the markets of Europe. From a 1933 book entitled The Revolutionary Movement by J. Findlater, we read the following. The Jesuits had established 20 strong mission centers called reductions, with many thousands of the Guaranis enrolled as their members. The Jesuits aimed to set up there a completely communistic system, in the sense that no individual rights. So, the Jesuits aimed to set up. No, I'm sorry. The Jesuits had established 20 strong mission centers called reductions, with many thousands of the Guaranis enrolled as their members. The Jesuits aimed to set up their completely communistic system in the sense that no individual rights were recognized and there was no private property. Everything belonged to the state and was supposed to be shared in common, but in reality, much, much, in, much the greater part of the proceeds of goods sold was always remitted to the Camarilla, Camarilla, Jesuit superiors in Europe. Camarilla, probably, and the Guaranis got only the bare necessities of life in return for their toil and sweat. The Jesuit leaders provided the necessary food, or unquote, I should say. So that was quote unquote. Um, from the Jesuits had established 20 strong mission centers all the way to life in return for their toil and sweat, quote unquote, from the book The Revolutionary Movement by J. Findlater. The Jesuit leaders, and so now this is continuing on, the Jesuit leaders provided the necessary food, clothing, and health care the Indians needed, while using them as worker bees to generate income for the order, just as the Soviet Union would do in the 20th century. The Jesuits maintained strict control over the activities of their subjects. Quote, neither would they allow any Guarani to learn Spanish, nor would they tolerate an intercourse between the Guaranis and the peoples of surrounding Spanish colonies, a prohibition maintained at the sword's point, unquote. They perfected their system of totalitarian control, all the while telling the world that their oppression over other people was in fact utopia, a deluded fantasy maintained by some Catholic historians to this day. Perhaps worst of all, that is that the Jesuit did not present any form of the gospel or what might be called Christian faith to these poor Indians. Quote, there is no evidence that any effort was ever made by the Jesuits to impart the truths properly, so called, of the Christian religion. When the Jesuits were expelled, the Guaranis, having had no moral or religious training to fit them to continue in the Christian faith in a few years, become as if no religious teachers had ever lived and worked among them. Unquote. The ideas the Jesuits developed in Paraguay over a period of 158 years were then communicated to Karl Marx in the 19th century. How funnily, huh? Quote, for 5 years, Karl Marx went to the Jesuit school in Trier, which during the Prussian period was known as the Friedrich Wilhelm Gymnasium, unquote. Along with Karl Marx, Other leading communists like Joseph Stalin and Fidel Castro were also trained by the Jesuits. In fact, the former Jesuit general Pedro Arrupe, 1965 to 1983, once boasted, quote, "And what makes you think we are not proud of Fidel Castro?" Unquote. While it is true that the popes are known for condemning communism, this is on their past seems to be more political manipulation than anything else, since Rome has repeatedly supported the principles of communist thought, the Communist Manifesto. Uh, yeah, the Communist Manifesto was first published in 1848. And within less than 50 years, we find the Vatican publishing declarations in agreement with it. In his book, Ecclesiastical Megalomania, author John W. Robbins notes the following, quote, one of the Roman Church state's most influential statements on economic matters is the 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum on the condition of the working classes. In this encyclical, the Roman Church state allied herself with the proletariat, which in Marxism is the great and final enemy of the capitalistic order. The encyclical's Marxism is so blatant that one Roman Catholic writer declared that much of the encyclical, Rerum Novarum, appeared only to repeat in more orthodox language what Marx had said 10 years before. Indeed, there are paragraphs, if not pages, in the Communist Manifesto that might have been written by the Pope. Unquote. Then, incredibly, after about 100 years of various papal diatribes against communism in all its forms, the Sunday Times of London reported that, quote, Karl Marx, who famously described religion as the opium of the people, has joined Galileo, Charles Darwin, and Oscar Wilde on the growing list of historical figures that have undergone an unlikely reappraisal by the Roman Catholic Church. End quote. The article goes on to quote Georg Sanz, a professor at the Vatican's Gregorian University, who, with the utmost subtlety, speaks about Marxism in a way that seems carefully designed to undermine capitalism and promote communist principles that Rome has always aligned herself with. Any study of the papal influence in world governments will prove that capitalism, which is the promotion of free enterprise, is the very antithesis of the official Catholic dogma. Because of these things, we cannot help but consider the possibility that the real purpose of the McCarthy era was to manipulate the American mentality with Hegelian tactics, intended to take the anti-communist fury to such an extreme that it became offensive to the American people. McCarthy's methods were so unreasonable, the idea of condemning someone for being communist was collectively shunned. If we consider the growing influence of communism today, we can. So, with that all being laid out, as far as that goes, go over to the more so a geopolitical issue with it. The Rothschilds are Jesuits. The Jewish Encyclopedia, Volume 2, page 497, admits that it is somewhat curious sequel to attempt to set up a Catholic competitor to the Rothschilds, that at the present time, 1905, the latter are the guardians of the papal treasure. So why would the Jewish people who are covertly, and we all know the Roman and Jewish relations back in the day weren't exactly great. They weren't exactly historically fantastic, and maybe I'll get into that a little bit later too with that. But now back to the matter at hand. If this latter statement is true, the Rothschilds control, in addition to their own fortune, the immense liquid resource of the Catholic Church, which is second only to the Rothschilds in wealth and power. Now, there's also BlackRock Financial, which is there as well. But not to get into any alt-right conspiracy theories and start pointing the finger at the you-know-who's, because this is not the point of these podcasts. This is just to point out mere facts and to elaborate and elucidate on this, as I promised, this was going to be. The Two Babylons, Part 7. The original source for Guardians of the Papal Treasure, Jewish Encyclopedia, published 1901, 1906. So now, The Two Babylons, Part 7, original source for the Guardians of the Papal Treasure, Jewish Encyclopedia, published 1901 to 1906, page 947. There's the links. With this, it's www.jewishencyclopedia.com. There's an HTML text version. But anyway, if you are not an American, you will understand why your country is on its present course, as it too is controlled by the Jesuit general through his select Jesuits, Knights of Malta, Shriner Freemasons, the Knights of Columbus, and the Illuminati's Masonic, Kabbalistic, Labor Zionists, Sabbatean Frankists, named after the Black Popes, baptized Jacob Frank, Jewish House of Rothschild. For the order controlled the infamous House of Rothschild since no later than the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, after which Jesuit-led crusade of the Rothschild family was surnamed the Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins, 3rd edition, page 90. The real power structure. The Treaty of Paris of 1763 designated King George III Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector of the Holy Roman Empire, and according to the Encyclopedia Judaica, the Rothschilds bear the title Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. The Vatican Treasury, of course, holds the imperial wealth of Rome. Imperial wealth grows in proportion to its victories in war, as should the Jesuit empowerment Regimini Militatis Ecclesiae implies the church at war is more necessary than the church at peace. According to H. Russell Robinson's Illustrated Armor of Imperial Rome, Caesarean soldiers protect themselves in battle with shields painted red. Since the soldiery is the state's most valuable resource, the Council of Trent admitted that this is preferring the Jesuits to all other religious orders. It is easy to understand why the red shield was identified in the very life of the church. Hence the appropriateness of the name Rothschild, German for red shield or Rothschild. The appointment of Rothschild gave the Black Papacy absolute financial privacy and secrecy. Who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church? I believe this appointment explains why the House of Rothschild is famous for helping nations go to war. It is fascinating that as Meyer Rothschild's sons grew into the family business, the firm took on the title Meyer Amschel Rothschild under Unson, also Meyer Amschel Rothschild Unson, which gives us the Norticon Mars, M-A-R-S, or the acronym. Isn't Mars the Roman god of war, whose heavenly manifestation is the red planet? There's the powerful Kabbalah here, and there's hardly an acre of inhabitable Earth that hasn't been affected by it in some way. Two Processi, Rulers of Evil, pages 160 to 161. International finance and banking are not primarily Jewish. Many of the powerful banking interests in the world are run by Gentiles, which is categorically true. One of the most powerful forces in international banking is the Knights of Malta, a Roman Catholic military order controlled by the Jesuit Superior General. Sadly, even a certain segment of the alternative media helps to propagate the lie that Jews run international banking. Interestingly, one of the titles of the Rothschild banking dynasty is Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. The Jews, as a people, have been used for centuries as a scapegoat by these international bankers and their secret societies, just as the Jesuit-controlled Knights of Malta to label the Jews as running banking, Hollywood, etc., is to throw out the proverbial red herring designed to throw us off the scent of the real controllers. Daryl Eberhardt, editor of Tackling the Tough Topics, January 28, 2006. Link to calldedecision.com. The Jesuit general has been the most powerful man in the world since Pius VII restored the Order of the Company in 1814. Because of the order's suppression by the Pope in 1773, the Jesuits began the Bavarian Illuminati with one of their soldiers, Adam Weishaupt. The Illuminati absorbed the Jewish house of Rothschild, creating a colossus of wealth around the world. Subject to the Jesuit general with its financial arm in place, the Jesuits then made war on the Vatican, including the Pope, the Roman Catholic monarchs of Europe, and the Order of the Dominicans. The Inquisition and the Crusade called the French Revolution the Napoleonic Wars for 25 years. The Jesuit generals, Masonic agents, particularly in the person of Napoleon Bonaparte, conducted war. Bonaparte also punished the Knights of Malta, driving them from their island home to Russia. Third Rome, or the third Rome, anybody, or third Fatima or whatever, with that one. Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassin, second edition, page 582. The Jesuits, now formally suppressed by the Pope, were allied with Frederick the Great of Prussia and Catherine II of Russia. The Jesuit general was in control of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry and now sought an alliance with the Masonic baron of the House of Rothschild. To accomplish this, he chose a Jesuit who was a German Gentile, not a Jew, by race, and a Freemason by association, Adam Weishaupt. Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins, 3rd edition, page 401. The Rothschilds were Jesuits who used the...
Operator.
So, where was I? Of course. Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins, 3rd edition, page 401. The Rothschilds were Jesuits who used their Jewish background as a faux to cover their sinister activity, facade. The Jesuits, working through the Rothschild and financier Nicholas Biddle, sought to gain control of the banking system of the United States. The Jesuits used Biddle and Rothschild to gain the upper hand in the American banking because they knew they could then control the people and effectively rewrite the Constitution according to papal law. Jackson was trying to stop them. We have already seen that the Rothschilds were the banking agents for the papacy's church. These three financial families, the Rothschilds, Morgans, and Rockefellers, all did the bidding of the Jesuit order because of the Jesuit infiltration in their organizations. They do whatever is necessary to destroy constitutional liberty in America and to bring the Pope to world domination. As we look back over the 20th century, we see how successful the Jesuits have been. They have continued to squander the wealth of America and continue to attack its great Constitution and civil liberties. Daily, the power of the Pope in the Vatican City increases. One day, they will achieve a total power again. Bill Hughes, The Secret Terrorist, page 16 and 17. Seldom is it mentioned that the Rothschilds, along with the Western bankers and industrials, financed the rise of Hitler as a bulwark against the Soviets. The ultra-right wing falsely describes the Rothschild as Jewish bankers, when in fact the Rothschilds are interwoven with the Catholic Church and jointly with the traditional mafia and the American CIA, interlocked with the Vatican Bank, which was pro-Nazi. Sherman H. Skolnick, The Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, article link.
Operator.
The Jesuits were driven to, Sherman H. Skolnick, The Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, article linked to www.beyondweird.com. That was from the previous quote. The Jesuits were driven to cooperate with the other two international brotherhoods, the Freemasons and the Jews, Rothschilds and Illuminati, in the destruction of the Spanish Empire. Salvador de Madariaga, Spanish statesman, the Jesuits in 1820. During the order of suppression from 1773 to 1814 by Pope Clement, that would be the 14th, General Ritchie, 18th Superior General of the Society of Jesus, 1758 through 1775, created the Order of the Illuminati with his soldier Adam Weishaupt, uniting the House of Rothschild with the society. So that would be during the suppression from 1773 to 1814 by Pope Clement XIV, General Ritchie, 18th Superior General of the Society of Jesus, 1758 to 1775, created the Order of the Illuminati with his soldier Adam Weishaupt, uniting the House of Rothschild with the Society of Jesus. That was from G.B. Nicoli, History of the Jesuits, Their Origin, Progress, Doctrines, and Designs. London, Henry G. Bone, 1889, pages 356 357. Jesuit Adam Weishaupt, 1748 through 1811, founder of the Illuminati, 1776, born in Ingolstadt, Germany, in the heart of the Roman Catholic Bavaria, from which the orders 30 Years' War, 1668 to 1648.
Operator.
So, Jesuit Adam Weishaupt, 1748 through 1811, founder of the Illuminati, 1776, born in Ingolstadt, Germany, in the heart of the Roman Catholic Bavaria, from which originated the Order's 30 Years' War, 1618 through 1648. Adam Weishaupt, a white German Gentile, was educated by the Jesuits. In 1775, he became a notorious professor of the Vatican's murderous canon law, including the evil Counter-Reformation Council of Trent. Since Pope Clement the 14th's bull of extinction was not enforced in Lutheran Germany, the order flourished at its University of Ingolstadt, out of which Weishaupt established the Illuminati in 1776 and joined the Grand Orient Masonic Lodge in 1777. He united the magnificent financial empire of the Kabbalistic Masonic Jewish House of Rothschild, the guardians of the Vatican's treasury, with the opulence of the international and secret anti-Jewish race, primarily White Gentile Society of Jesus. That was from Nesta H. Weber, Secret Societies and Subversive Movements, South Pasadena, California, Emissary Publications, 1988, originally published in 1924. Weishaupt and his fellow Jesuits cut off the income to the Vatican by launching and leading the French Revolution, by directing Napoleon's conquest of Catholic Europe as the order would do with Hitler by the revolt against the Church, led by such priests as Father Hidalgo in Mexico and Latin America, by eventually having Napoleon throw Pope Pius the Eighth in jail at Avignon until he agreed, as the price was released, to reestablish the Jesuit order. The Jesuits' war in the Vatican was terminated by the Congress of Vienna, and by the secret 1822 Treaty of Verona. Ever since, the Rothschilds have been the fiscal agents of the Vatican. Emanuel M. Josephson, Jewish-American physician and historian, The Federal Reserve Conspiracy and the Rockefellers, 1968. Let's see. You also find ex-British intelligence officer Dr. John Coleman exposed how the Rothschilds and even the Rockefellers, while simply doesn't come close to some of the members of the Committee of the 300, which is controlled by the Order of the Garter, Pilgrim Society, all the inner circles of SMOM. The Jews were brought into positions of power with the banking back in 1066 by the Norman Anglo-Saxon monarchs. For this, they accepted being controlled. Remember that the law of banking is known as the International Maritime Admiralty Law. This maritime law was based on Vatican canon law. All the war banks known as central banks get controlled from SMOM, controlled Switzerland. The Federal Reserve pays the Bank of England, which finally ends up in the Swiss Bank of International Settlements. All you need to do is to study the SMOM and its members to look who's who in banking. Craig Oxley. Link to davidick.com. Well, that's kind of a tedious, that's a weird source. I don't really like him. But anyway, suspicious decorations and obedience. Early in the 19th century, the Pope approached the Rothschilds to borrow money. The Rothschilds were very friendly with the Pope, causing one journalist to sarcastically say, "Rothschild has kissed the hand of the Pope. Order has at last been reestablished." Derek Wilson, Rothschild, The Wealth and Power of a Dynasty, page 101. Link to www.biblebelievers.org.au. Karl Mayer Kalman Rothschild, 1788 to 1855, from Österreich, or Austria. He even granted Pope Gregory the 16th cash injections and was received on January the 10th, 1832, an audience indicus on the hand allowed, and the Order of St. George awarded. That was translated to link to www.lumira.de translated. This is a quote from Nathan Rothschild. I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. Nathan Rothschild. Amschel Mayer Rothschild wears a Maltese cross. After all, Amschel Mayer was the first son of old Rothschild, Mayer Amschel, and took over the head office in Frankfurt. There's Mayor Karl Rothschild. Only the decorations to the left could be Jewish. The others are rather not. I'll post these here. Then there's the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, which was previously mentioned, the SMOM. Jesuit-controlled SMOM has a permanent observer status at the UN. Who created the CFR, which created the UN? The Jesuits controlled the CFR. The Rothschilds are simply court Jews for the papacy and always will be unless they play up. Then the papacy will simply annihilate them by any means necessary. If you look at what's going on in the world properly, you see Roman Catholic control quite clearly. And with that, the Rothschilds have been under the Black Pope's thumb since the 18th century. Be careful of the many diversionists out there playing with your mind. The Jesuit always control both sides. When you put money in the bank, does the bank own that money, or can you remove it and place it in another bank or under your mattress? Yes. If there's a crash, you can lose your money, but the Jesuit will never lose his money. Remember, the whole banking system is fully controlled by the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, and has been for eons. Switzerland is the banking HQ, closely followed by the city, New York, and Dubai. Rothschild is subordinate to the Jesuits and the SMOM commanders, period. You need to understand how the Jews were granted the positions of power within the SMOM banking. Look to 1066 and the agreement with them being ruled by the Norman Anglo-Saxon monarchs. These Jews have their uses to the Jesuit. The Jesuit isn't stupid. He will utilize what he can to make his power cemented and stronger. The fourth vow, Jesuits, are the most organized of any order known and the most powerful. What do you hear daily? Rothschild, Rothschild. What didn't you hear much at all until recently? The Jesuits and the Superior General. For that matter, the SMOM are still kept pretty much quiet in the InfoWars. The Council on Foreign Relations was created by a Sovereign Military Order of Malta back in 1921, after their creation of the Royal Institute of International Affairs in 1919. Both of these control the 1868 corporation known as the United States. Both are arms of the SMOM via their inner cores within the city known as the Pilgrim Society, or the Garter, and the Committee of 300. The CFR created the United Nations. Now notice how the SMOM have permanent observer status within the United Nations. Look to the likes of New York Jesuit Joseph O'Hare, who's in the CFR. It is correct. There's many labor Masonic Zionists within the CFR, but remember, also they are Masonic, which itself means some more subordinate to this Jesuit Superior General who controls all Freemasonry. Again, thanks to Adam Weishaupt. If you look at the Georgetown Law Journal, volume 71, pages 179 to 1200, you will see it stated that the Norman and Anglo-Saxon kings own the Jews. It states that Jews are controlled by Great Britain. It also states that the Talmud is now the law of the land as of 1066, and it's enforced by the popes and kings. This is what you would call the Uniform Commercial Code. Gold Dragnet members of the ATS Forum. Then you have the picture of Rothschild, the Queen of England, the Pope Francis, or Queen of England Elizabeth, who recently passed, and then, I don't know, some random cardinal probably or bishop. It is accurate to posit that Australia, New Zealand, and Canada are not independent sovereign countries. However, these nations are not owned and run by the UK. They are owned and run by the House of Windsor Crown Temple Syndicate within the City of London Corporation. The head signatory of the Crown Temple Syndicate is Elizabeth Windsor, Queen Elizabeth II of England. It should not be forgotten that the most powerful financial syndicate in the Western world is that of the European Rothschilds. The Rothschilds, because of their power base inside the City of London Corporation, have been controlling membership of the London Crown Temple Syndicate. And they also have executive control of the Vatican and Mafia, though the P2 or through the P2 Masonic Lodge in Italy. Gotta look more into that. I'm not the P2. That's interesting. Anyhow, the financial affairs of the new UK coalition agreement in London are also Rothschild controlled. The line management here is understood to be Jacob Rothschild to Nathaniel Rothschild, and I'm Rothschild and Sons Limited, New Court, St. Swithin's Lane, London, EC4P4DU, Oliver Luton, George Osborne, British Chancellor of the Exchequer, Queen Elizabeth II fronts for the Rothschilds. She is the largest landowner on earth. She is the head state of the United Kingdom and of 31 other states and territories. Is the legal owner of 66,000 million acres of land, 1/6 of the Earth's land surface. A conservative estimate of the value of the Crown Temple Syndicate land holding under the Queen's signature is 17.6 trillion. That would be pounds. And then there's see more at www.henrymacau.com. I'm not going to read the whole hyperlink, but it's in here. But by L. Seun Brampton for henryma.ht ml $st st hash, and then some other just one. So hold on. Let's see. Yeah, there's various things with this going on. There's a lot of comments as well. But the one that kind of caught my eyes is this one posted here, which should be recognized. It's kind of one of those things where where there is a bit of a derivative of what's posted. Go more through the comment section. I might turn this into a whole text-to-speech article just to have a direct source. The tongue stretched through the earth, and so the people turn and praise them. And no fault may be found in them, may not be criticized. Psalm 73, 9 through 10. The slang word Jew is for Judah. Judah means to praise in Hebrew. But the Jews are not praised. They are greatly despised, in fact, and wrongly so. The red herring of the Jesuits accomplished this injustice by pointing the finger of intrigue and conspiracy at the Jews. The Babylonian Vatican escapes with the praise. No newspapers dare vilify, condemn, or heap scorn on the Vatican. If the Jews claim they are Jewish, then they are lying and are not really Jews, according to anti-Semites. When it comes to who killed Jesus Christ, then they who claim to be Jewish are most definitely the Jews. Anti-Semites have brains like scrambled eggs. They cannot make up their minds, so they have to bob each way, an Australian term, probably means monkey in the middle, go back and forth. That is why they are easy to deceive to the point of convinced. Easily sucked in, they are dead wrong. Well, that's certainly true. When you read Revelations 3:9 and 2:9, make sure you notice the synagogue, church of Satan are impostors and most assuredly not Jews. These imposters are not an apostolic church either, which is a New Testament church, and that's debatable. That they claim to be. Revelation 2:2, the Jews are an Old Testament church that definitely does not claim to be apostolic. Anyways, put Revelations 2:2 in evidence with 2:9 and 3:9. The Catholic Church claims to be apostolic in its Nicene Creed statement of beliefs. That's obviously not correct because of the Great Schism of 1054 AD, and the Nicene Creed is definitely Orthodox. These Latin words are included in it. I am writing this in lowercase, so what happens and change them. There's et unam sanctum Catholicam et apostolicam ecclesiam. These are words self-capitalized, showing how much clout this Roman Catholic Church has. Do it yourself, sleuth. Start using your otherwise gullible brain. What church is lying? What this church is lying about is that it is a Christian New Testament church when it is not. It is the Church of Satan. It sings hymns to its BVM in Latin, naming her Lucifer. Another Latin word, which essentially is Venus to them, but Lucifer is Satan. Upon your walls, Jerusalem, I have set watchmen all the day and all the night. They shall ever be silent. You who put the Lord in remembrance take no rest, and give him no rest until he establishes Jerusalem and makes it a praise in the earth. Isaiah 62, 6-7. Georgia Guidestones are signed RC Christian. The initials RCC stand for the Roman Catholic Church. RC Christian is really Roman Catholic Christian, and its full name, hidden in plain view. They are right in your face. They love to say the Christian, whereas they are Satanists of Satan's synagogue church. No secret is hidden from them. Ezekiel 2:8-3. But the Pope is not infallible, wise as a god. Ezekiel 28:2. Don't tell him your secrets. Your secrets in the confessional. There may be a camera identify. Well, that's all just a reply, that bottom part, to somebody. But these are very, very, very good points here to what the article stated beforehand. So now, obviously, there's the Orthodox ties into this, right? With the Bolshevik and communist persecutions here, there's a lot of differences, and obviously having this narrative established by the Jesuits and the Catholic Church, well, we can see on how this in turn makes a very orthodox attitude towards the West, and this operator. So what might say this attitude between all the name calling, all the name throwing around, calling people Nazis, calling people communists, calling people socialists, Marxists. There's a whole plethora of ideological dialectics going on, and not a whole lot of constructive sourcing this is the meta politic of it, because, the Jesuits are Judaized, but who controls the money supply and who are the money managers, who's put out in front. I mean, it's apparent with the mafia, so with the way they were run, is the Italians and the Sicilians were putting out, their bookkeepers, and their bookkeepers most of the time happen to be Jewish, right? Or happen to be, figures in the mob like Meyer Lansky, right? So with that being said, you can build this whole red herring, as the article stated, which is another good way to put it. Maybe it's too boomeristic of me, but I'll say it anyway. It's even older than that. But see, there's that red herring, and there's that narrative that had to be built, right? For something along the likes of, even more constructive, and more along the lines of, what the Catholic Church should be here. So, another thing is that, there's always. Operator. So then you get like comments like this with the one, I just read above about that whole thing with the Catholic Church. Calling you out. See that you had a double post that long ridiculous comment. As Peter, who previously posted that last comment. No, you're either a liar, a shill, or just misinformed. One of the three. The Jesuits would not and do not have an anti-white and anti-European agenda. The Jews, the Zionist elite, do and have been on record about it for centuries. The Jews run the banks, the media, immigration in every European nation, and are the forefront of every radical left agenda the world has yet to ever know. You're wrong or lying. The Jesuits are, to anyone who knows a thing about this, under the rule of the Zionist Jews. So just stop. Perhaps you're a Jew, and who doesn't want to hear that information? There are always the likes of this. There's always that. So the problem is that when you do post this, and you know you do have issues with what is posted, right? And the problem is that this deception, this cloak and dagger type of stuff, when you outright point out on who controls banking, on who does all these things, um, you know, it's always pointing to something else, right? So the problem is that there is the other side to this, the Orthodox Church side to this, the Orthodox Christian side to this. And there's this book, The Orthodox Church and Communism, from Part 5, The Modern World. It's the summary right here, and is more so points out the Russian Orthodox Church, because this is going to be obviously more so with them concerning that. Anyway, the summary: the two Russian revolutions of 1917, March and October. Many people forget that there's two revolutions. Found the Russian Orthodox Church poised to embark on its own program of reform. It was always the policy of Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, and the Bolsheviks to portray the state religion as benighted, clinging to the past, upholding outmoded values because of believers' lack of contact with the outside world, the totality of censorship, and the cessation of objective historical research. In the Soviet Union, this view tended towards acceptance in the world at large. The Russian Orthodox Church stands alone. The truth was very different, as recent research has begun to uncover the partial opening of the archives in Russia. Late 19th and early 20th centuries were, in fact, one of the most dynamic and creative periods in the history of the Orthodox Church. Debates on the role of the parish and the laity were widespread, and even if inconclusive, were not always comfortable for the hierarchy. The abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, March 1917, led to the summoning of Pomensi Sobor, which met on the 16th of August 1917 for its public session in the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, which was later to be destroyed. The agenda was huge, but the early sessions indicated the approach to the church reform. And with that, the agenda was huge, but the early sessions indicated that the approach to church reform would be balanced and unemotional. The debate on the restoration of the Patriarchate was just getting underway on the 28th of October, when the bombardment of the Kremlin, a mere stone's throw away, interrupted it. In the atmosphere of extreme tension, Metropolitan Tikhon Belavin of Moscow was elected Patriarch, the first time the office had been held since Peter the Great had abolished the Patriarchate in 1721 and replaced it by a lay administration under an over-procurator. Well, that's interesting, because you have this opiate of the masses kind of thing completely plague it. And you had the philokalia come out of the Ottoman Turkish persecution during Greece during the 400 years, which they had to suffer their own catacomb church. Their own catacomb church kind of thing happened. And it was a problem. It was a problem throughout the Orthodox Church. And more so, they tried this kind of opiate of the masses kind of epidemic with both. And it's sad to see, because these persecutions did heavily influence the Orthodox Church, right? So you had this non-Western understanding of it. So now this obviously is going to get back into, well, more Orthodox context is, this would tend to. So there's another article, going from the book, and this isn't from the book that I previously mentioned, The Orthodox Church and Communism, Christianity and Eastern Christianity, the Cambridge History of Christianity would be Eastern Christianity, edited by Michael Anglode from Cambridge University Press. That was the one I previously mentioned. With the Russian revolutions and the persecutions. This one is more so of a recent article by Aristotle Papanikolaou, um, Eastern Orthodoxy's estrangement from democracy after the end of communism on March 9th, 2022. After the fall of communism in the early part of the 1990s, most of the Orthodox world was thrust into a situation of political upheaval for which it was not theologically prepared. Communism was to be repudiated, that much was clear. But the role of the Orthodox churches within the changing cultural and political landscape of Russia, Romania, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Georgia, and Armenia was not clearly envisioned. At first, it appeared that the Orthodox churches in these formerly communist countries would embrace democratic reforms as the antithesis to communism. When faced with concrete situations, however, their attitude to democracy was more ambivalent. I mean, that statement alone just doesn't, just proves how much the Western world doesn't understand Orthodox Christianity, right? So, such was the case when Russia was bombarded with evangelical Christians attempting to re-evangelize what they thought was a godless country. No doubt inspired by proclamations similar to the one given by Pat Robertson, who, on his Christian broadcast network, showed a map of Russia and declared that Russia had never known of Christianity. In addition to the issue of religious pluralism, these newly emerging democracies would be faced with issues such as the role of religion in public schools, religion on identification cards, chaplaincy in militaries, and state financial support of the institutional church. As communism was falling, the European Union was consolidating its financial and political influence within Europe, which would affect both Orthodox countries within and outside of the European Union. The relation of Orthodox countries to the European Union, either as member states or aspiring member states, would inevitably raise issues of the role of religion in public life within these Orthodox countries. In relation to the European Union, these Orthodox countries would also be invested in the debate about the mention of the Christian roots of Europe in the Constitution of the European Union. In the post-communist Orthodox countries, the Orthodox churches would fear influence of the secularized European countries as they attempted to reassert the cultural influence of Orthodoxy within their respective countries, which they tied to the national identity and history that had been purported to be lost and decimated by the communists. Finally, the negative portrayal of the Serbian people by the media during the Bosnian and Kosovo wars would contribute to an Orthodox sensibility that became mistrustful of all that was Western, including the basic principles of democratic liberalism. The post-Orthodox communist countries were confronting this new situation virtually without any grounding. What emerged in the decade of the 1990s was an Orthodox world that was not really sure how it felt about Western democratic liberalism. The first major event that would highlight Orthodox ambivalence is now by the infamous Russian law on the freedom of conscience and religious association. After a period of embracing religious pluralism, the Russian Orthodox Church soon realized that Russia was being flooded with evangelical money, proselytizing Russians toward evangelical Christianity and thus away from the Russian Orthodox Church. At that time, the ROC did not have the financial resources to compete with the American evangelicals, so it supported the law that restricted religious freedom. In response to the criticism that such a law is a violation of a basic human and democratic right, the argument was made that the restriction of such a right is warranted for the sake of the unity of Russian culture. In other words, since Orthodoxy has been integral to the history and formation of Russian culture, it is the privilege within Russia and the legal protection of that privilege. See, this is what the Western world just doesn't understand. See, because when they say when they want to compare patriarchs to being mini popes or being under the holy seas as the Western world sees fit. This is what they don't understand about Orthodox Christianity, and like I said previously, with the integration into the civilizations of China and Japan, the communist, socialist nature or undertone, or well, overtness, totalitarian control in somewhere like China, but then you have a traditional religion like Buddhism or some kind of Eastern religion there that has kept the civilization and the traditions and the cultural customs alive during that time period is just something the Western world just doesn't understand this. And it's not to call back to traditionalism. It's not to go all evil, be evolution on anybody, or to um, side side steer over, take a left turn over into Duganland. It is more so in the context of them saying this about Japan. Japan is more capitalistic and more modernized than somewhere like China. But the problem with that is that that's still a traditional. You see those cultural overtones, those cultural overflows, like Shintoism being so ingrained in Japanese tradition and Japanese culture and their customs. And then you have, the ideology or, Western democracy slash capitalism integrated into that. They still never lost their traditions. They still never lost the the original cultural roots as to who they are as a people. So when Orthodoxy was unmasked in a way to the West, well, I already predicated this with the Jesuits and the control that they have, right? And then, using the Jews as a front and as a way to gain control, right? And the financial aspects of it. Well, with communism, seeing this is just something the West just doesn't understand because of how integral Orthodox Christianity was to Russian culture. It obviously progressed Greek culture and Hellenic culture and thought, and just turning Greece into something more than what it was. They always say Holy Russia, but also Holy Greece. And they were under persecution as well from the Muslim Turks or the Ottoman Turks. So, you have these many persecutions under, the knife or under the sword when it comes to um, Orthodox Christianity. The Catholic Church promoted a lot of this persecution. They did that with the Ustaz, which I'll get into in some other podcasts with this. And then you had the persecutions just go on and on when it comes to all this. So when Orthodoxy was unmasked and people didn't understand it in the West with the liberal democratic mind, well, that's the issue right there. They want freedom. Freedom of religion is a human right. Well, the problem is that it's not a human right. That's a various. Whenever they mask something, is something should be a human right. That is something that is just a problematic statement. It's just a completely problematic statement. Because they like to say in the West, well, abortion is a human right or is a choice, right? No, it's not. No, like that's just it. Where it's just like they like to hyperbolically think these things through and think, well, just because I have autonomy, from some authoritarian regime, well, that's an issue. So when it was unmasked, just as the Ukrainian Russian war that's going on right now, back in the day with the Serbian Kosovo conflict, that the anti-Orthodox sentiments were already being set up, and as I pointed out, you know, via via the Jesuits and via what they do with communism. Well, that's just it right there. So there's more opiate of the masses. There's more of that conundrum with that. But let me continue with the article. So here we have um, here we have not long after the Russian law was enacted, an ROC bishops council released in August 2000 a comprehensive social document, The Orthodox Church and Society, the basis of social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church, together with. So there's. Hold on. So the social. Not long after Russian law was enacted, an ROC Bishops' Council released in August 2000 a comprehensive social document, The Orthodox Church and Society, the basis of the social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church, together with basic principles of attitude to the non-Orthodox. The social concept reaffirms a 1994 Bishops' Council declaration that the Church does not give preference to any social system or any of the existing political doctrines, cited in 3.7. The ROC does not advocate democracy, nor does it reject it. Implicit is an acceptance that democracy would be the de facto modus operandi for Russian society for the foreseeable future. Given the new democratic situation in Russia, however, the social concept clearly affirms that it would not be in which there existed a strict wall of separation between the church and the state. Even if the ROC rejects any formalization as a state church, it is indicating that it accepts a symphonia between the church and the state, in which the state would guarantee orthodoxy a privileged place within Russian society, and the church would do its part to promote the construction of civil society within Russia. The social concept rejects a democracy that is based on the marginalization of religion in the public realm, the latter being defined as morally neutral. It sees its role in promoting a civil society that under a moral canopy approved by the ROC. Furthermore, although it does not repudiate religious pluralism, it is clearly a managed pluralism that does not threaten the primacy of orthodoxy within Russian culture. It also promotes the teaching of the place of orthodoxy within Russian history and culture, the teaching of the faith to Russian Orthodox students, and moral education to non-Orthodox students. The form of government is thus irrelevant to the ROC, so long as it helps reconstruct and maintain an Orthodox culture, which theoretically would value the inviolable dignity and equality of all participants within the culture. As a result of Russian history, and because of a theological perspective that does not accept the privatization of religion, the ROC expects orthodoxy to be privileged in Russian culture, for such privilege to be facilitated in the various spheres of society. In addition to this law, these documents, and at the joint Russian-Iranian Commission on the Islam Orthodoxy Dialogue held in Moscow in June 1999, then Metropolitan Kirill Smolks and Kaliningrad, chairman of the Department of External Relations of the Moscow Patriarchate and presently Patriarch of Moscow, and Ayah Muhammad al-Tazkiri, president of Iran's Culture and Islamic Relations Organization, expressed their unified stance in protecting their traditions against what they perceived as an attack from Western liberal values. All documents released by the ROC, together with statements made by high-ranking ROC hierarchs, are consistent in their attack on what they describe as an inherently anti-religious, liberal, atheistic, humanist agenda that is individualistic, narcissistic, and mutually exclusive with an orthodox understandings of the person. This atheistic humanism is a reigning ideology of the United States of America and Western Europe, and the ROC does not want Russia to follow that path. A similar post-communist ambivalence to democracy is evident in Romania and even in Greece, which escaped communist oppression. The situation in Romania parallels that of Russia, in which the Romanian Orthodox Church is attempting to maintain a critical distance from the state while advocating for the formation of an Orthodox culture. The church in Romania is attempting to effect a model of managed pluralism, where the teaching of orthodoxy is privileged in public education, in which orthodox moral principles shape public morality on issues such as abortion, homosexuality, and legalized prostitution. In Greece, the relations between church ah the relations between the Church of Greece and the state are always in flux. Even if orthodoxy is the constitutionally established religion of Greece, there are few who doubt compatibility of an established church and democratic government. But certain issues and even manifest the church's own ambivalence toward democratic structures. In the past decade, the issue of removing religious identification from the national identification cards betrayed the church's own perpetual fear of the secular erosion of Orthodoxy's influence on Greek culture. Yeah, I mean that's very problematic. Obviously, as a Greek Orthodox Christian, that is something that they have been very, very trying hard to maintain. And see, that's it right there. Like that's something the Western world just does not understand about the Orthodox world. And me being somebody who's Western, maybe these are little editorials here and there. Me being Orthodox, Greek Orthodox in the Western world, I see that from the outright because they don't understand that is a whole separate entity. It's a whole separate thing. It's a whole separate way of thinking. And Catholics don't understand it. Protestants don't understand it. And then with that set up by the Jesuits and their supposed theology, which is just masqueraded Kabbalism, and they prop up and use a family like the Rothschilds as cannon fodder. Well, that's just it. They're using all these other perspectives to bring about what they want, and it's been harnessed by something by Chrislam because obviously Pope Francis being a Jesuit, well, now he brought on the unification of the Abrahamic religions supposedly, and there's already been infighting because just like all three of the Abrahamic religions can't even agree on the sky. The sky is blue, just as the two democratic parties of the United States can't agree on anymore, right? But when it's behind the scenes and giving money to a foreign aid or foreign power, more than likely Zionist Israel, well, they seem to send money there, right? They have no problem. Or, promoting genocide of Europeans, especially faithful Orthodox Christians, as they see in the Ukraine, more as opposed to Russia, as genociding those Orthodox Christians, right? They don't really have any issues when it comes to any of that. So it's always interesting on how the West is portrayed when it comes to these kind of instances. So with these various cultural differences, there's definitely issues with this. It should be made clear that the Synod of the Church of Greece did not object to the removal per se, but argued that it should be made optional. They also objected to the fact the state did not discuss the issue with the church before deciding on the removal. Many Orthodox hierarchs, both within Greece and outside Greece, did not agree with the official position of the Synod, claiming that the church should have nothing to do with a matter for which the state alone is responsible. The ambivalence to democracy is also evident in the Church of Greece's support of ban of a controversial book that made suggestions of sexual encounters experienced by Christ. For anti-democratic tendencies, some might also point to the response by the hierarchs and clergy of the Serbian Orthodox Church during the wars in Bosnia and Kosovo. During the Bosnian War, the responses by members of the hierarchy and clergy of the Orthodox churches in Bosnia and Serbia were confused and contradictory. Such responses led some to identify the Orthodox Church as inherently anti-democratic. Miladin Zvotic, former philosophy professor at Belgrade University, argued that the Church's ideology is common to that of all authoritarian ideologies. It was because of the Orthodox Church that the society was easily convinced that it had bec- had to become obedient followers of the Communist Party, while Mirko uh, Djordjevic, retired literature professor, assessed that the Roman Catholic Church announced the Second Vatican Council that it was the duty of believers to support democracy and human rights. But the Church in the East has never addressed these issues and found itself unprepared with the fall of communism. As the war progressed, the Serbian Orthodox Church were consistently declared publicly its oppositions to Yugoslav presidents Slobodan Milosevic and its support for the implementation of democratic reforms and structures in Serbia itself and throughout Bosnia and Kosovo. The Church's position culminated in its immediate acceptance of Vojislav uh, Kostunica as the legitimate president of Yugoslavia. While it turned toward supporting democratic reforms, it attempted, some might argue contradictory, to make the teaching of religion compulsory in public schools. Although there exist extreme nationalist and fanatical elements within the Serbian Orthodox Church, the conflict in the Balkans during the past 3 decades is a manifestation of an Orthodox Church being unprepared to deal with the consequences of the fall of communism, and of a church in search for an understanding of its proper role in relation to state and culture, whose identity it has played in a constitutive role in forming. Their different histories notwithstanding, a consistent pattern starts to emerge in the Orthodox attitude to modern democracy. First, there's never unequivocal support for democratic forms of government over other options. Even if there is not repudiation of democracy. The Orthodox churches always promote what looks like democratic values, especially the in, in, inviolable dignity and equality of the human person. Second, there is clear concern for maintaining, as in Greece, and reestablishing a cultural hegemony. Finally, there is a unanimous condemnation of a form of global democracy that calls for a strict wall of separation between the church or between church and state, an ideology that is seen as inherently anti-religious and atheistic, and that only leads to a degraded form of individualism. In short, there is ambivalence on the part of the Orthodox modern Western form. In short, there is ambivalence on the part of the Orthodox to modern Western forms of democracy, which is ironically best summed up by an American Orthodox theologian and former dean of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. As the son of a Carpatho-Russian immigrants to the United States, I cannot imagine my life in any other society, and I feel extremely grateful for my personal destiny. But as an Orthodox Christian, I cannot imagine a way of life more insidious to Christian orthodoxy and more potentially dangerous to human being in life. What is absent from all these post-communist responses is any rigorous theological reflection on the implications of the central principle of orthodoxy, divine human communion. For thinking about a coherent orthodox political theology. And then editorial statement. This essay is an excerpt from the first chapter of The Mystical as Political. It's part of an ongoing collaboration with the University of Notre Dame Press. You can read excerpts from this collaboration there. And then Aristotle Papanikolaou is a professor of theology and co-founding director of Orthodox Christian Studies Center at Fordham University. So, I mean, yeah, like there is a lot there with the relations. As far as communism after the fall of communism and the opiate of the masses, as to what Marx vehemently disregarded. I mean, I guess orthodoxy was kind of lost, but it's weird because you had the persecutions and the literal slaughtering of Christians, right? You had the physical manifestation as well as the spiritual denouncement, right? and the overt satanic influences. But now there's subversion with the church. There's subversion against it, right? So now it's a different opiate. Now it's an opiate for individualism. Now it's an opiate for the state. Well, which inadvertently is what communism is. Communism is the oligarchical state control. So socialism, right? So you have these you have these little digs, or you have these ideological formations, and then you have the outright reactionaries as to what they said with the Serbian Orthodox, the religious fanaticism, right? But the problem with this is that that is a reaction, just as National Socialists like to say, or National Socialism liked to propagandize, that it was an outright reaction towards Bolshevism. Well, yes and no. Like these outright reactions towards communism are always a yes and no kind of thing. But it's always the Jews. Well, as I pointed out, the Jesuit order and the financial control that's backed by them has more of a stake in it than anything else. And the empire, such as the British Empire, has more of a stake in it than anyone else. The financial middlemen, such as the Rothschilds, who control trillions of the world's wealth, as well as, you know, they're money managers for the papacy, the papal states, and, you know, and the and England. So it's under a corporation, right? So it's not necessarily outright Britain or England. It's the Windsor family, right? So the weird part is that, and then you go back with the family of Windsor, or they were replaced by German royalty. So the weird part about all this is that the integrations of the Rothschilds, the Zionists, and the underpinning of the Nazis and the Bolsheviks persecuting and slaughtering not only Jews but Christians and Europeans, their racial cousins. So you have various issues across the board with all of this. You have various issues across the board with, you can say, or they reiterate, on how Karl Marx reiterated, well, religion is the opiate of the masses. But the issue is that the opiate, for what it seems, is that the atheism that comes out of these movements is going to be more oppressive and more um, undistinguishable, and turn it into more of a cosmopolitan culture than what any ism could ever stop, what any ideology could ever prevent, right? So with these capitalist kind of notions, well, communism and capitalism are the same side of the Jewish coin. No, it's incorrect. That's incorrect. Well, liberalism, is influenced and controlled by Israel, and it's promoted, by those that have, financial control per capita. Once again, that's partly correct, but that's also out of context, because when you have the Jesuits who have little control of the money and the flow of it, as to these money managers, which are banking families like the Rothschilds, well, then there's issues there, right? There's even issues with that. And if these supposedly Jewish families that have so much control are playing second fiddle to the Vatican and to the Jesuits, well then what? Well then what? What kind of JQ is that, right? So now you have these issues which are antithetical to Christianity, and especially Orthodox Christianity. They're not only they're antithetical to the schism for what happened between religious Jews and non-religious Jews as well. So there's issues there, and people don't even want to recognize that schism, because it's going on to this day, just as much the schism between Orthodox and Catholics, right? Pretty much the only two forms of the only forms of actually legitimate Christianity that there are, Protestants notwithstanding. But Vatican II upholds the fact that democracy has to be recognized, right? The individualistic human rights have to be recognized. Orthodoxy is foreign to that, and the ambivalency that orthodoxy shows towards those democratic notions is not the fact that it holds it in contempt, but it definitely, as that American Orthodox theologian pointed out, he has never been so grateful. But on the other hand, well, he feels like he's serving a second master, right? Maybe a little bit out of context. That might be a little bit hyperbolic. He feels like, that the democratic system, or the individualistic system. So he feels like the individualistic system is not working itself out. The hyper individualistic nature of America is obviously something that is not anything that's to be recognized. Obviously, we are individuals, but we're some of the greater parts, right? And as orthodoxy is foreign to this whole Western democracy notion, well, rather ambivalent to it. You have two sides of an ideological coin. That, in a way, to Orthodox Christianity, is they're both enemies. One overtly, and one in the subverted notion, as I pointed out earlier. But there's the third Rome phenomena too with this that I wanted to get into. The idea third Rome, and this is from orthodoxwiki.org. Third Rome. The idea of Moscow being the third Rome was popular since the early Russian czars. Within decades after the fall of Constantinople to Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire on May 29th, 1453, some were nominating Moscow as the third Rome, or New Rome. Stirrings of this sentiment began during the reign of Ivan III, Grand Duke of Moscow, who had married Sophia Paleologu. Sophia was a niece of Constantine the 11th. The Eastern Roman Emperor and Ivan could claim to be the heir of the fallen Eastern Roman Empire. It is noteworthy that before Ivan III, Stephen the Fourth, Dusan, king of Serbia, and Ivan Alexander, king of Bulgaria, both related to the Byzantine dynasty, facing the decline of the Byzantine Empire in that would be the 14th century. Made similar claims. Bulgarian manuscripts advanced the idea of Trnovo, the capital of the Bulgarian Empire, was the new Constantinople. These plans were never realized as the Ottomans defeated the Serbs at Kosovo Pol in 1389 and put an end to the Second Bulgarian Empire in 1396. With the occupation of the Despotate of Vidin, however, the rhetoric developed to this respect earlier in Trnovo, was imported to Moscow by Cyprian, a clergyman of Bulgarian origin who became Metropolitan of Moscow in 1381. The idea crystallized with a panegyric letter composed by Russian elder Philotius in 1510 to their son, Grand Duke Basil III, which proclaimed two Romes have fallen, the third stands, and there will not be a fourth. No one will replace your Christian tsardom. Contrary to common misconception, Philotius explicitly identifies Third Rome with Russia, the country, rather than Moscow, the city. Since Roman princesses had married the Tsars of Moscow, and since Russia had become, with the fall of Byzantium, the most powerful Orthodox Christian state, the Tsars were thought of as succeeding the Byzantine emperor as the rightful ruler of the Christian world. The word Tsar, like Kaiser, is derived from the word Caesar. Grand Duke Ivan IV was proclaimed the first Russian Tsar on January 16, 1547. On November 2nd, 1721. Peter I restyled himself as emperor and autocrat of all Russia. The new title was supposed to reflect both the traditional claims of his predecessors and his successes in establishing Imperial Russia as a new European power. So how does this relate to the modern day well, there's an article here. There's the Kremlin Playbook 3 report by Heather A. Connolly and Donatine Rue. This was published on December 21st, 2021. From a U.S. perspective, the separation of religion from state, is sacrosanct. The drafters of the Constitutional Convention believed that the state should have no power to influence its citizens toward or away from any religion. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights enshrines this protection from state interference and specifically protects an individual's right to freely worship. I mean, that can go more both six ways towards Sunday in a lot of ways, but yeah. But what if a foreign power were to actively seek influence religious and traditional views to further its own agenda? Well, isn't that like kind of the issue we're tackling? And obviously, the Third Rome, has a lot of issues. A lot of issues with that. There's a lot of that manifest destiny kind of thing in an orthodox sense. So there's issues with that as far as America is concerned, and they're always protecting that idea, right? This is a new and particular pernicious. This is a new, excuse me. This is a new and particularly pernicious front of Russia's malign influence campaigns, or Russia's malign influence campaigns. Combating it will be a uniquely difficult challenge for the United States and its European allies, which already have different religious traditions and relationships to historical and cultural identity. How can these governments protect citizens' religious beliefs, traditions, and values from malign influence while at the same time not encroaching upon religious freedom? Until that question is answered, Russia will continue to use traditional and conservative values to foster division within Western societies. A genuine expression of political and cultural preferences. Conservatism is a political philosophy based on traditional social stability, stressing established institutions, and preferring gradual development to abrupt change. Russia is using tactics designed to strategically exploit or heighten elements of this set of beliefs in order to further its political goals in key states. Yep, as noted by Dugan in the InfoWars and stuff, and how the whole alt-right thing is influenced, with Duganism and his Eurasian tactics, or his fourth political theory, um, goofiness, he obviously is very problematic to what people perceive as the truth. But the other side of this coin is that Dugan is an avowed, or former avowed, Crowellian Satanist. So, you got to swap out the good with the bad. Obviously, with religious tradition, being influenced and the West not really understanding orthodoxy, or the West not really understanding, thinking they're fighting communism, but, at the behest of what they might, see as preserving democratic values and individual freedom. Well, that has certainly a lot of issues to it, right? So what is strategic conservatism? There is an important difference between conservatism, which contains political, cultural, religious, and identity elements, and Russia's use of strategic conservatism. Strategic conservatism reflects the idea that political and cultural preferences can be used as tools of influence. It encompasses a specific set of means used by the Kremlin and at times the Russian Orthodox Church and other outlets to achieve a range of Russian domestic and foreign policy objectives. This concept inflates the value of customs and tradition by prioritizing unquestioned respect for hierarchy or the regime of religious supremacy and collective interests over the interests of the individual. Strategic conservatism is frequently defined in opposition to Western democratic ideals of pluralism and liberalism, in defense of Russian actions, and in support of the Putin regime's longevity. But Russia's view of conservatism is very different from how the West perceives the Kremlin's instrumentalization of strategic conservatism. The rapid and destabilizing change in Russia in the 1990s compelled the Kremlin to reconstruct a great power narrative for Russia, build upon its historical traditions through the creation of a moral framework. That's quote unquote moral framework. This framework protects these traditions and orders the domestic and international landscape according to certain values, such as um, the the quote unquote God given value of diversity among nations, end quote, and the need for and then quote multipolar world order based on uh, pluriculturalism, end quote. In the words of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Well, I mean that comes right out of which. But then, like a lot of people on the alt right like to say, this mirrors what America is, right? And then, you do have Dugan with all of his nonsense, which that all that said by Putin came right from Dugan's playbook. So there's that nonsense there with all of those traditional tactics and his revamped traditionalism, right? As his philosophy or his political philosophy is there. And then, in the political realm of, well, you could call it political philosophy, political science, things of that nature, and even political comparison. Because in reality, Russia, the United States, Great Britain, or England, they're all empires. They all see themselves as empires. They don't see themselves as civilizations or nations. They all have empirical goals. And the problem is where it's so foreign to Europe and Western values is that it's not democratic. And then again, Western values aren't exactly inherently democratic, you know. So there's issues with that as well. But the way Russia is, and it's seen as now a multicultural, with a multipolarity aspect to it. There's definitely issues with it at hand. Same kind of issues that America it mirrors, right? So in a lot of ways, Russia practices what it preaches the same way America does, but with the strong religious tradition and the adherence to those traditional values, well, it definitely makes a big deal as far as trying to find some stability when it comes to the country, right? And it doesn't enshrine those democratic values as number one, right? So there's some symphonia there, but when it's not struck, I mean, there's obviously people in the West or Western thinking, people who think democracy is the truth don't understand that. And that this may hit a little bit on that NPR article that uh, Anglo Ortho did with. But those enshrined values are just what the West expects Russia to kowtow to down to. But the weird part is that they're already kind of doing it in their own empirical kind of way, which is strange, which is really strange. But in a lot of other ways they're not. But I mean, I don't know. Just how they have cafeteria Catholics and Protestants here. There's cafeteria Orthodox Christians for sure. Um, you know, but the fact that there's a defined state religion, and you don't understand the democratic values because of there being a defined state religion. Well, that's just that, and it can be a big dog and pony show in a lot of ways. But the weird part is that just with those Western democratic values, they don't understand that. So there's that there. The Orthodox faith is the moral arbiter of this framework. In the eyes of the Russian Orthodox Church, the ROC, any effort to promote or give parity to other religious values is seen as detrimental to and ultimately destructive of Russia's unique moral and cultural civilization. Any change must be carefully managed so as not to disrupt political status or cultural identities within its framework. And I was also talking about, and I got cut off, that the NPR article that Anglo Ortho did with the Prudentialist on his channel. I'll probably link that too. And there's just that NPR article was just a display. Oh, and I'll do my own thing with that too, a quick rundown. But that's just proof that they don't understand it, right? They just don't. They want to enshrine Western or democratic values as that. But then what does this have to do with the Third Rome, right? Well, got to get there, and Putin's political aims. Got to build the narrative, right? From a Western point of view, this pluriculturalism is the way for the Russian regime to maintain internal control and prevent the international community from imposing universal values on Russia, promoting them from within. The regime believes these universal values produce color revolutions that threaten its stability by subverting its legitimacy and disrupting its domestic and cultural order. Something's happening in Georgia right now, which the country, not the state, to this. From this angle, the Kremlin's need for internal control reinforces its incentives to set forth its own brand of conservatism as an opposition to Western ideals of democratic governance. Russia's implementation of strategic conservatism has several leading actors. These actors either take their cues from the Kremlin, act on their own interests, or a combination of the two. Putin is leading the proponent of strategic conservatism, along with the ROC, which relies on a network of affiliated and friendly non-governmental organizations. The Kremlin is also assisted by a group of Orthodox entrepreneurs. Example given, Orthodox oligarchs, which are there, and intellectuals who support either Putin or the ROC's efforts, principally Konstantin Malafeev, Vladimir Yakunin, and the boogeyman, Alexander Dugin. These actors work along parallel tracks to accomplish a set of goals that serve the Kremlin's interests. Some of these goals are broad and strategic, while others are more focused on some actors' narrower interests. Through strategic conservatism, the Kremlin aims to advance the following goals. Reduce pro-Western sentiment in targeted countries. 2. Increase support for Russia's policy actions, domestically and abroad, and legitimize the Kremlin's narratives. 3. Undermine support for EU membership along with member states and reduce support for EU and NATO membership with aspirant countries. 4. Keep countries in the post-Soviet space within Russia's sphere of influence. 5. Undermine internal cohesion, sovereignty, and potentially territorial integrity in a way that supports the Kremlin's interests. Example given, Bosnia. 6. Displace or weaken the leadership of the ecumenical Patriarchate, who is seen as hindering a consolidated Orthodox world under Russian leadership. And 7. Lift sanctions, a collateral and longer-term gain, and nudge Western governments toward accommodating Russia's policy interests. The actors of strategic conservatism pursue some of these goals in a parallel or in collaboration, and through certain channels both at home and abroad. Well, this certainly would be more of an empire-building kind of mentality and more of a practical thing towards the Third Rome mentality. This definitely is something that, kind of derives itself off of that manifest destiny attitude that the Western world has. Only they're trying to do it through orthodoxy and Russia's traditions. But the issue here is that obviously once again the West doesn't understand this. All mud democratic values. And, with that being said, the outright weirdness, though, of all those oligarchs that were named, well, they're all linked to Russian Satanists. And that main Russian Satanist was Alexander Dugin that I named previously. I mean, they're all tied to that. So it's weird. It has a parallel of, Catholic Church as well, with all their questionable activities and all their questionable ecumenicism and all that going on, right? There's plenty to see there, which is pure apostasy. And then there's on this side of the coin, and now they want to take away the ecumenical patriarchate or the powers that be, with the first among equals with Patriarch Bartholomew. That patriarchate has its own, set of issues. But the problem is that, guys like Dyer, guys like Dugin, and make these pro-Russia arguments and, yammer on about it. Those are issues in and of themselves. And when you have philosophers or political scientists or whatever they're called, and they're funding these programs, and there's outright Satanism involved with it, aka Dugan, there's definitely issues. There's definitely issues with that, right? So the West, comparatively to itself, and saying evil, evil Russia, well, there's a lot of that attached to it. Practice. So here we go again. Russia's strategic conservatism in practice. Russia's strategic conservatism operates internationally through two main multi-directional channels to gain influence and reap political benefits. The first channel is the Orthodox world, and in particular, the construction of a united world under Moscow's protection. So now with this, obviously, they have a lot of issues with that, right? And that's all those multi multi polarity and multi-directional channels to gain influence and reap political benefits. Well, that's completely the fourth political theory in a nutshell, right? Um, so the first channel is the Orthodox world, and in particular, the construction of a united Orthodox world under Moscow's protection. This is the religious expression of what is known as the Third Rome narrative. In the Moscow Patriarchate's view, the 15th century conquest of Constantinople by the Ottoman Empire displaced the center of Orthodox Christianity to Moscow, making it the Third Rome. This is both theological. This is both a. So where was I? Let's see. So the first channel is the Orthodox world, and in particular, the construction of a united Orthodox world under Moscow's protection. This is the religious expression of what is known as the Third Rome narrative. In the Moscow Patriarchate's view, the 15th century conquest of Constantinople by the Ottoman Empire displaced the center of Orthodox Christianity to Moscow, making it the Third Rome. This is both a theological and political concept which serves the Kremlin's interest to be seen as the center of pan-Slavic power and authentic inheritor of these empires. So there's a graphic here that says Russia's strategic conservatism. There's the Orthodox. It's split up by the Orthodox world, traditional values. Under the Orthodox world, religious expressions of the Third Rome. Aims: elevate Russia as the defender of the faith, present the Russian Orthodox Church as the true inheritor of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, create distrust of other faiths, reduce legitimacy of secular authorities perceived as encroaching on religious freedom, foster support for Russia's actions abroad when in defense of the faithful, example given Syria. Actors: the Russian Orthodox Church, cultural organizations and NGOs, Orthodox entrepreneurs, and the media channels. And then on the other side, traditional values, politico-cultural expressions of the Third Rome. Aims: augment the decadent West narrative, present Western liberal values as a threat to national identity, question the authority of or legitimacy of a country's leadership, doubt the value of the EU and NATO membership, reduce potency of criticism for internal policies by advocating non-interference into domestic choices. Actors: Russian Orthodox Church, cultural organizations and NGOs, Orthodox entrepreneurs, media channels, Kremlin affiliates, political parties. That's the graphic that lists and aims the actors of the two channels of strategic Russian conservatism. Strategic conservatism elevates Russia as the defender of the faithful and closely associates the church with Vladimir Putin, just as the spiritual leadership of Russian czars was associated with the church. By doing so, strategic conservatism creates distrust of other faiths and secular authorities that are perceived as challenging Russia's authentic leadership and protection of the faithful. The second channel is a broader ecosystem of traditional values that constitute the political, cultural implementation of the Third Rome concept. Through media, NGOs, political parties, Russian officials, and norms entrepreneurs, the Kremlin effectively challenges the tenets of Western liberalism. These channels spread the argument that liberalism threatens religious beliefs, and in turn threatens the national identity that is so closely tied to these beliefs. This is the narrative of Western decadence and the West's loss of identity as it abandons religiosity and tradition, making association with Europe and the United States a threat to believers and conservatives everywhere. This is how strategic conservatism seeks to break societal consensus around the liberal democratic order by reducing its attraction and building support for Russia's policy preferences within special constituencies. As a malign influence force multiplier, strategic conservatism builds on and uses Russia's existing propaganda and disinformation networks, including news outlets funded or supported by Russia. It employs cyber and hacking tools to undercut other actors or narratives or to provide plausible deniability to the Kremlin. And it can create connections in constituencies or affinity groups. So with this is the narrative of Western decadence and the West loss of identity as it abandons religiosity and tradition, making association with Europe and the United States a threat to believers and conservatives everywhere. This is how strategic conservatism seeks to break societal consensus around the liberal democratic order by reducing its attraction and building support for Russia's policy preferences within specific constituencies. As a malign force multiplier, strategic conservatism builds on and uses Russia's existing propaganda and disinformation networks, including news outlets funded or supported by Russia, employs cyber and hacking tools to undercut other actions or narratives to provide plausible deniability to the Kremlin, and it can create connections to constituencies or affinity groups that would otherwise not be receptive to Russian posturing, either for historical reasons or more recent geopolitical developments, as in Georgia. Well. I mean, that's definitely right out of, again, Dugin's playbook. And the oligarchs there, I mean, they're not as influential, but they do have ties to, somebody that's influential here, like Dyer. And they do, they have had their influence throughout well, they're not changing the theology of the church, but they have various influences as to how they promote this whole third Rome identity thing, right? And their strategic conservatism, right? They think that they're the defender of the faith. No one country is the defender of the Orthodox faith, and they're not the true inheritor of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. That is something that is more widespread throughout the Orthodox world. This is a very the irony with this is this is a very Catholic or Roman attitude to have towards it, and consequently enough, that's why they're called the Third Rome. Create distrust of other faiths. Well, yes and no. I mean, that's as an Orthodox Christian, there's a certain line of reasoning with that. Reduced legitimacy of secular authorities perceived as encroaching on religious freedom. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that because there is only one true faith. But the way they're going about it and the way they're trying to influence this and using, well, avowed Satanists within their ranks to do it is not much different than how the United States is doing it, both on an empire basis and on a local basis. There is all kinds of influence, as I as that Michael Aquino character, could be comparative to somebody like a Alexander Dugin, right? So you have these levels and these political philosophers and these psyop guys and what have you, and there's satanic influence and Luciferian influence all over the place, and that has nothing to do with Orthodox Christianity, right? But when you have these actors and doing it, and all this plausible deniability that the Kremlin has been seen as having, I know there's the Russia collusion narrative, but it goes deeper than that. That's the other part. It's not just Trump colluding, and it's not just many conservative, figures colluding with it. There's definitely issues with this, and there is a malign influence force multiplier with it. So once again, like the Western decadence and that whole narrative, I mean, it's there, and it's obviously, issues with it. But with that, like, people don't understand that in the West because it's such a narrative thing, and we have all these individual rights. Well, that's all well and good, but yeah, I mean it's so ridiculous, right? Um, you know, it's just we do deserve being called out. I mean, we do deserve it, right? So with that being said, this will lead into Russia versus the decadent West. The economic upheavals, migration pressures, and speed of social change over the past decade in the West have spurred intense debate over specific and competing visions of society. Russia has benefited from this societal division, particularly related to debates around cultural and traditional values and religious beliefs. It is focused primarily on three areas where societal tensions appear highest. First, the defense of the traditional family, marriage between a man and a woman, typically within a patriarchal system. There's the Mo patriarchy again, in opposition to Western support for same sex marriage and non traditional families. This debate serves Russia by exacerbating divisions between religious communities, Orthodox followers, as well as Catholic and Muslim communities, and those who support same sex marriage. In 2013 in 2013, the Russian government demonstrated its leadership on this issue by passing a federal law for the purpose of protecting children from information advocating a denial of traditional family values, and has recently branded Russian citizens who defended the LGBTQ plus rights as Western foreign agents. Second is the protection of a unique cultural and historical national identity against Western policies related to demographic diversity. Here, traditionalism and identity are fused together such that disrupting one threatens the other. Any demographic change, particularly immigration from Muslim majority and non white countries, exacerbated in the public perception by low birth rates, is viewed as a direct challenge to identity and tradition. Therefore, Western governments perceive support of multiculturalism, welcoming migrants, and celebration of diversity, such as LGBTQ plus parades, create fissures that the Kremlin exploits. It does so by stoking demographic panic through social media amplification that highlights the perceived dangers and threats of all these elements to national identity. The third narrative is that Russia, as the sole defender of traditional values, is a savior that wants to protect the West from itself. By preventing its decadence and ruin, the Russian Orthodox Church, ROC, is a key partner in spreading this message. Its claim to represent authentic orthodoxy, well, that's quote unquote, but in reality, to me, that's not something that is to be played with. Uh, anyway, its claim to represent, quote, authentic, end quote, orthodoxy is close to tied to defense of uh, of believers from Western decadence, and its aim to take over the leadership of global orthodoxy. It increasingly speaks to conservative believers in Europe, including Catholics. So this third narrative is that Russia, as the sole defender of traditional values, is a, quote, savior, end quote, that wants to protect the West from itself by preventing its decadence and ruin. Just thought I'd throw that in there too, because that's a very Duginist concept again. I mean, both people that wrote this article have to be, had to read the fourth political theory. Either that or they have done some research. Here, the Kremlin has flipped the script. In 1991, the West, quote, saved, unquote, Russia from communism. Now Russia believes it is, quote, saving, unquote, the West from its own decadence by promoting strategic conservatism. However, this Russian, quote, rescue mission, end quote, demands obedience to the collective rather than respect for individual rights and religious freedoms. And then this is a quote from Konstantin Malofeev. Quote, this is the same guy who funds and runs Dyer. Europe is dying. The West, in the U.S., President Reagan's time, helped for this communism smoke to get out from Russia. Now it's our turn. We have to pray for the liberal smoke to get out from Europe and America, Constantine Malafiev. These narratives are primarily pushed by Kremlin and affiliated actors. However, in many countries, there is bottom-up demand for these ideas, and Russia's values leadership. Local enablers of Russian strategic conservatism. Russia uses these narratives to identify and appeal to local actors, cultivate outreach to them with little investment. The Kremlin has targeted specific messaging or deepened divisions on both sides of the debate. Some cultural organizations that gravitate around political circles are sympathetic to Russia's civilizational mission to save Christianity and the vision as the last white world. I got to read that again because there's quotes. Some cultural organizations that gravitate around political circles are sympathetic to Russia's, quote, civilizational mission, end quote, to save Christianity and the vision as the, quote, last white world, end quote. Some among French political and cultural circles have supported Russia's intervention in Syria because it supposedly protected Eastern Christians against, quote, Islamization, end quote. Some representatives even traveled to Syria in 2015 and 2016. Representatives of business interests, some of whom are connected to conservative or traditionalist circles, share some ideological affinities with the Kremlin, have financial interests in Russia, or are tied to Russian business interests in their countries. Some business actors operate directly in politics, while others fund religious and traditional communities. This is the case, for example, of Ivan Savidis, a Russian-Greek dual citizen who invested in church construction and pilgrimage tourism in Greece and on Mount Athos. Let's see. Yeah, there's definitely more. European and U.S. political parties and politicians have also praised Russia's model on LGBTQ plus issues, nationalism and sovereignty, and family values through its legislation and messaging. Others extol Russian leadership in defense of traditional values in opposition to the European Union and NATO alliance, and its protection against certain religious and ethnic groups. Although there are limits to developing localized networks and local issues may be too narrowly defined to support broader Russian interests, there have been benefits to cultivating local affinity networks that can be used at the right time. The limits of strategic conservatism. Russia's development of strategic conservatism has created sympathetic networks across Europe and the United States. However, its achievements sometimes remain aspirational, and its strategies and tools are at times contradictory and show certain limitations. First, while at home, the Kremlin appears simultaneously to imperial and Soviet nostalgia to reinforce national identity and historical continuity, these areas are sharply at odds with each other and entailed markedly different treatments of the Orthodox Church. Abroad, appeals to traditional values or national identity have at times become so aggressive that local actors of the Kremlin's partners are brought to the attention of national authorities, which diminishes their broader appeal or impedes their activities. Second, the Kremlin and the Russian Orthodox Church are not always in alignment. There are ongoing tensions between these two entities, even within the Russian Orthodox Church itself. Some of these conflicts became very visible during the COVID-19 pandemic when some within the Russian Orthodox Church, in the name of religious freedom, refused to accept state-imposed restrictions to protect public health. And despite the Kremlin's efforts, Orthodoxy remains a largely cultural label for many in Russia, which could explain the Russian Orthodox Church's international push for followers abroad. Finally, the Kremlin fundamentally does not engineer cultural wars. It exploits existing cracks in societies by identifying natural ideological connections within certain countries and using local actors. Some of these actors do genuinely connect on an intellectual or values level and do not hide this affinity, while others try to hide these ties. Keeping the faith. Resentment and grievances unleashed by rapid societal change have brought together disparate, disparate, not desperate, disparate political forces that find safe harbor in traditionalism and decrying the decadent West. Excuse me. Across a broad ideological spectrum, Russia positions itself as defender of the traditional order and conservative values, the political and cultural embodiment of the Third Rome. Hold on a minute. So you have all this, fear mongering all over the place, right? So, um, let's see. Keeping the faith. Resentment and grievances unleashed by rapid societal change have brought together disparate, I already said this, political figures that find safe harbor in traditionalism, decrying the, quote, decadent West, end quote. Across a broad ideological spectrum, Russia positions itself as a defender of the traditional order and conservative values, the political and cultural embodiment of the Third Rome. The Kremlin amplifies this message through U.S. and European conservative networks and norms, entrepreneurs, and relays through a media ecosystem that overlaps the right wing and populist circles. On occasion, these messages can radicalize individuals. For example, in Ukraine, Orthodox foreign fighters repeatedly joined the conflict in eastern Ukraine from abroad in support of Russian-backed separatists they viewed as engaged in a righteous endeavor. Recognizing Russia's use of strategic conservatism and identifying its tools and sources of funding as is a fundamental part of understanding Russia's malign influence. To prevent Russia from fueling societal and cultural divisions in the West, the United States must recognize that Russia ultimately seeks to undermine the democratic tenet of respect for the rights and religious freedom of the individual. Only then will it be possible to protect the spirit of the First Amendment and, quote, keep the faith, end quote. Well, let's see. Let's go into about the authors here because there's obviously a lot of undertones that are obviously terribly liberal and very very just ridiculous. Let's see. Heather A. Conley. About the authors, Heather A. Conley, former Senior Vice President for Europe, Eurasia, and the Arctic, and Director of Europe Program, CSIS. Heather A. Conley was a Senior Vice President for Europe, Eurasia, and the Arctic Director of Europe, Russia, and Eurasia Program at CSIS. Prior to joining CSIS as a Senior Fellow Director for Europe in 2009, Conley served 4 years as the Executive Board of the Office of Chairman of the Board at the American National Red Cross. Like that organization doesn't have issues of corruption. From 2001 to 2005, she was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs with responsibilities for U.S. bilateral relations within the countries of Northern and Central Europe. From 1994 to 2001, she was a senior associate with an international consulting firm led by former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Richard L. Armitage. Ms. Connolly began her career in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. She was selected to serve as a special assistant to the coordinator of U.S. assistance to the newly independent states of the former Soviet Union, and she has received 2 State Department meritorious honor awards. Ms. Connolly is frequently featured as a foreign policy analyst and Europe expert on CNN, MSNBC, BBC, NPR, and PBS. Well, there it is. Among other prominent media outlets. She received her BA in International Studies from West Virginia Wesleyan College and her MA in International Relations from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS. Donatine Rui, Associate Fellow, Europe, Russia, and Eurasia Program, CSIS. Donatine Rui is an Associate Fellow with the CSIS, Europe, Russia, and Eurasia Program, where she oversees the program's research portfolios on political developments in the European Union, including UE policy and Brexit. Russian influence in Europe and Southern Europe and Mediterranean issues. She supports the program's grant writing and fundraising efforts for those portfolios and manages the Europe program's European Election Watch platform. She has co-authored such reports. Let's see. Uh, so Donatien Rui is an associate fellow with the CSIS Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program. She oversees the program's research portfolios on political developments in the European Union, including EU policy and Brexit, Russian influence in Europe and Southern Europe, and Mediterranean issues. She supports the program's grant writing and fundraising efforts for these for those portfolios and manages the Europe program's European Election Watch platform. She has co-authored such reports as the Kremlin Playbook 2, Restoring the Eastern Mediterranean as a U.S. Strategic Anchor, and Crossing Borders, How the Migration Crisis Transformed Europe's External Policy. Ms. Roux previously worked at World Bank on disaster risk financing and insurance, drafting situation reports on natural disaster preparedness in Francophone African countries. Ms. Roux received her BA in political science from the University Libre de Bruxelles in Belgium, and her MA in global affairs from the Jackson Institute for Global Affairs at Yale University. So, I mean, when you have people who are not pro-orthodox, but it's really typical of them, to take these kind of criticisms because they don't understand it. They don't. When people write articles like this, they don't understand it. And with the previous other ones that I put out or read over, they set up a narrative to kind of bring this all home to what Russia believes is a third Rome, in defending their values versus the Western decadence and the Western values. But however, there's a flip side of this coin because of Russia's obviously inauthentic, um, you know, values to defend the true faith, right? So there's issues with that, and I'm not saying that as being I'm not being a Hellenophile here. I'm saying when you have Satanists on one side and Satanists on the other, and they're all in your government and they're all trying to use the state control to do it. Well, those are issues in and of to themselves. You can decry about Western decadence and its breakdown of values and all that you want. The issue is when there's people on the other side that are just as evil and just as demonic. Well, that issue that issue is just in and of itself. Just two competing factions for absolute power. But that's just it. Where it's like, there's that Russian manifest destiny with their empire, and their belief of tying it with Symphonia with the Orthodox Church, but that's continually at odds on a political level, on a geopolitical level, on a cultural level, on an economic level. There's issues with this all throughout uh, Russian culture. So so that's just it, where it's like, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And with that being said, um, with somebody like Dugin and the other oligarchs influencing policy, influencing the money, and them being, decadent unto themselves, while there's people who are dirt poor, right? So there's the other side of the hypocritical coin with this. That's an issue all entitled to itself, right? And the West can cry radicalization all at once, and it doesn't understand. Russia doesn't understand democratic values. Well, neither did communism. But then again, socialism and communism are closer. Are not far off from what these democratic values want. And in a way, there's a ton of cultural Marxism tied with that as well. So the issue is that in truth, the Orthodox Church stands, right? And that's just it. That's something these Western people who write articles like this last one don't understand when it attaches and explains the third Rome to itself. But I had to pick this kind of article because of the explanation and the obviously manipulation that on the other side, the Russian oligarchs are using, right? So there's obviously issues with all this, and there's obviously misconceptions all around. But I hope this clears some of it up, and to tie it all in, you know, and to tie these well, sort of three narratives together as to how I saw this as going from on how the Jesuits and the Vatican have influenced it and have propped themselves up in a way and have been obviously financiers for this decadence in a way. Not just blaming the Jews for it. There's definitely issues with the way Western Christianity is sought because it's in obviously opposition to Eastern Christianity, Eastern Orthodoxy, right? So there's obviously that schism that has always been there. But to point out, the power players with it, it's really at the forefront, between the East and the West when it comes to Christianity, right? And then you go into what was the fall of communism, the fall of the Iron Curtain, and what the Orthodox countries had to deal with, right? So, and then you get into this whole Third Rome concept in the shadow of what was once the Soviet Union, and you need to the Western people don't understand these concepts because they have a hard time because there's so much hysteria surrounding it. And then you have the various players, who obviously the liberal media did push a lot of these narratives, falsely so, but there is some truth behind it. There's nuggets of truth everywhere, and that's just it. You have to really look for this. And then I forgot to mention the CSIS stands for Center for Strategic and International Studies. So that's where this Kremlin Playbook 3 article came from. And when people who want to enshrine these Western values and think that it's going to be compatible, it's these values, that's all these individual things that the West has had to deal with in both a Protestant sense, a Catholic sense, and all the religious plurality, all the pseudo crap that has to go on. But I mean, it surmises in that quote by that that American Orthodox theologian, right? It's just that you know, for it's summed up by an American Orthodox theologian and former dean of Saint Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary as the grandson of Carpatho Russian immigrants to the United States. I cannot imagine my life in any other society, and I feel extremely grateful for my personal destiny. But as an Orthodox Christian, I cannot imagine a way of life more insidious to Christian orthodoxy, more potentially dangerous to the human being in life. So that's just it. That's just it. Like it's that mentality that I had towards the West. And the problem is that that mentality that the West has towards Christianity, right? They embody it within Catholicism, as I pointed out. They embody it with using the Jews. They embody it with using, the terrorist threat that Muslims impose. That Mossad obviously has a lot to do with it. The CIA has a lot to do with it. So there's always these, fake threats, and there's always all this fear mongering, and there's all this non faith in God, right? So that's what happens. Like that's always what happens. And when people lose faith or lack of control or don't know how to deal with any of this, then there's a lot of potentiality for this hysteria. And when you have the eroding of the traditional values and the eroding of all this, well, no wonder why a third Rome mentality seems so foreign to people who don't understand these concepts. In the shadow of communism, you think that these Western democratic values are going to come in and fill the void and fill the vacuum, right? Either with, you know, the uh, the military industrial complex exploiting, the third world and exploiting, troops, of whom we used, and saying Islam is bad, but you Protestant Christians can go over there and fight, be America's sons. It's sad. It's really tiring because people are you know realizing this. But when you have these traditional values attacked, and people think that well, if you don't stand for these Western democratic values, these individualistic, and more importantly, these satanic values that are a hindrance to the family, that are prohibiting all kinds of things, and people who stand for traditional values are being called every name in the book. Whilst you have people who are rampantly, promoting degeneracy amongst all kinds of values, what they see as their value systems, which is heavily inverted. It's more than that. So when you have Dugan and Aquino kind of doing the same things in the same instances, behind the scenes is satanic, well, oligarchs and satanic philosophers in a lot of ways. That whole thing of that veneer of what both sides want to stand for, the West being more overtly, the liberal order being more overtly evil and pushing these agendas than Russia. Well, that's just it. Where it's like these traditional values and these conservative values aren't being honored and aren't being valued, right? At all. So when it's at odds with the Orthodox Church and what it really stands for. So I mean, you have these oligarchs obviously vying for power. You have these different empires vying for power. You have all these mentalities going on and all these different dialectics going on as to how you know these issues are all over the place, right? And I mean, it's not to the point um to where it is, right? So it's just various issues across the board. It's various issues for competing power structures, and it's various issues for these dialectics that are foreign, very foreign to orthodoxy. And in the light of persecution, the West has its own version of religious persecution when they go against these traditional values. When they want to attack those traditional values, and then people come out, but then people are called names for defending those traditional values and enshrining them. Well, traditionalism is something entirely different than what even Orthodox Christianity is, right? But to the West, those are just values, right? Those are things that can be swapped out, replaced. Well, I can just I can have these individual rights, and that's all that matters. No, no, that's not all that matters. That's that is those good intentions will pave the road to hell. And somebody like Dostoevsky, who is another one, who is a Russian author, oddly enough, did have a lot of lines, and did have a lot of quotes to where these kind of things are pointed out. And then the one most poignantly that he had, um, you know, it's this one. Tolerance will reach such a level that intelligent people will be banned from thinking, so as not to offend the imbeciles. In a lot of ways, that's happening in Russia. In a lot of ways, that's happening in America. And obviously, they're both different reflections of one another. And then another Russian author, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I call upon America to be more careful with its trusts. Prevent those from falsely using social justice to lead you down a false road. They are trying to weaken you. We can only reach with determination for the warm hand of God, which we will so rashly and self-confidently pushed away. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So, I mean, I just pulled a Peterson there and quoted two Russian authors back to back, but it's true. I mean, it's true. That's why this is why the West just doesn't understand and I understand that Russia has its issues and a very manifest destiny kind of empire mentality with it, but it just doesn't. The West doesn't understand orthodoxy. This is their issues, and this is their alignment towards orthodoxy, which is why the ambivalent stance towards democracy is something different. So there's that, and there's a very religious is an opiate of the masses kind of mentality with the quote with the First Amendment and the rights that are enshrined there, because people become so apathetic and people become so irreligious that it just doesn't matter, right? So that's regardless of a lot of these points. But is more freedom really the opiate for the masses when it comes to religion, or is less freedom, such as communism, such as Marx pointed out, socialism that led to communism, outright persecution versus outright demoralization. So which tactic is more appropriate? You had the old Soviet ties where Dugin, wanted all the multipolarity stuff, and then you just had the outright mind control of somebody like Michael Aquino, who would probably be more in line with what the Jesuits want, or as the alt right always says, the Jews, right? So there's all that kinds of nonsense, but that's just it. That's the multipolarity schizophrenia that goes on within these frameworks, and I see it. I even see it within the Greek Orthodox Church. There's issues with that as well. But for Russia to just outright declare, that they want to take power away from the ecumenical patriarchate is obviously an issue in and of itself as well. So there's always these power struggles that go on. There's always these things that go on. But the way they demonize the Western liberal world is known unto themselves that they also have demons within their midst as well, and people who are not good actors either. So it's a lot of give and take. There is a lot to be upset about. There is also a lot to be okay about, I guess. But the truth is that in the shadow of the communist and these dialectical empires and these ideological empires that fell, well, there's the subversive element to attack the church, and there's the overt persecution. So with all those issues combined, there's a lot of it. And what is a stronger opiate? Subdued subversion, or just overt slamming it into your veins and pumping it into you through stimulation as an overt kind of persecution, as Solzhenitsyn said, pushing away that hand of God. So therein lies the another episode. Thanks for listening. And here is a bit of an editorial, because I forgot to talk about the author of The True Authors of Communism and Socialism, The Jesuits, by James Arndt. And James Arndt, about James Arndt. He was raised in the Hegeswich neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois, served in the United States Air Force, USAF, from 1970 to 1974, became a full-time missionary for Christ, living 40 years in Japan, 3.5 years in Russia, and a few months in other countries such as Finland, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, South Korea, Taiwan, and mainland China, where he also served the King of Kings, Jesus, as an ambassador for his kingdom. Yep, and that's just it. That was a little editorial that I forgot for him. As far as the covert geopolitics article goes, there isn't really an author for this. It's just authored by somebody named Geopolitics 101, which I assume is a pseudonym. So that's just it for the editorial.